I was like the youngest person in history to have $1 billion business. I think I just turned 20 when our company was valued at $1 billion. So we raised something like $130 million in an 18-month period. And that was a bad thing.
Do you regret raising as much money as quickly?
Yes, 100%.
Why? I spoke to some of your investors. This is the one area where Samir fucked up is hiring.
Oh, big time.
Did you sell secondary?
Of course, a small amount.
Do you regret not selling more? With LitPress, you've got to sell for 125 million.
Yeah, we would have sold for more than that.
Were you tempted to sell for that?
Tempted? Did I think about it? Yeah, of course.
Do you think people stabbed you in the back? Ready to go? Samir, I'm so excited for this, dude. It's wonderful to have you in the studio in person.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Not at all, my man, but I want to start with the beginnings of Vise. Like, what was the aha moment for you with Vise? And just take me back to that.
So I think it's less the beginning of Vise and more the beginning of our entrepreneurial journey. I think what's unique is I started my first startup at 12. I was at this summer program at Northwestern. My parents are like, you cannot go to traditional summer camp. You must do college courses. So like 6th grade onwards, they sent me to this college summer program at Northwestern. And one year, I think it was summer of 8th grade, I met this kid, Runik. And he was the kid across the hall from me. And we're like, I'm from Cleveland. He's from Detroit. We're so bored in the Midwest. School's like pretty easy. And like the iOS programming language, Swift, had kind of came out recently and it just started taking off. And we're like, well, let's build apps for small businesses. Let's learn how to code. Let's use Swift and let's build apps for any small business that wants an app. And that was kind of how we got our start to our entrepreneurial journey. We started with a game and then we built an app for a chain of car washes. We built an app for a medical conference. All kinds of different apps. We made like 30 grand by the time we were 14, which felt like a ton of money. We felt like we were rolling in it. And my co-founder got a research opportunity with a prestigious university in AI research because he was a longtime math researcher. He was doing math research in, I think it was graph theory, and it translated quite well over to AI research. And we realized, well, what if we could use AI to build apps? What if any small business could type in their app idea in our system and we could use AI to build an app? And that was our first real startup idea. The challenge was the team we got to work with us was the wrong team. It was people we met on the internet. We blew all the money we built making apps for small businesses on kind of trying to fund the startup. And the technical challenge was way harder than we could have ever imagined it to be. So unfortunately, that was our first failure, but it opened us up to this idea of AI quite early on and got us all hyped on the idea of building a startup.
So it's funny, whenever I meet founders today, Samir, I always say, how did you first make money? Because I always believe that the best entrepreneurs start early. No great entrepreneurs came out of Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, went to McKinsey, and that's where they made their first money. It's always starting something very early. Do you agree with that?
100%. I think it's just having that motivation, like that passion motivation that's developed early. So I think in our case, it was building apps, but even before that, I was obsessed with garage sales. I would go to my grandma's house and find all of her junk and try and sell it at garage sales. And that was the thing I did when I was single digit age.
How old were you when you started Vise?
I was 15 and a half when I started Vise.
Okay. Who was the first big yes to you with Vise?
That's actually funny. So I think there's two stories here. I think the first is our team early on, we didn't have that much money. We were consulting with these financial institutions, which is how we discovered the need, the problem to deliver personalized portfolio solutions in an automated way to financial advisors. We were actually consulting with these big financial institutions on AI, but we didn't have a ton of money to actually pay people to build us the product. So, outside of us doing it ourselves, we found a team of engineers, mostly just through scraping AngelList and cold emailing people and reaching out to people on LinkedIn. If you go through my LinkedIn in 2014, 2015, 2016, it's just hundreds of cold messages. We got the first 2 engineers to say, oh yeah, I'll work on this on equity nights and weekends. So that was the first big yes. And that was able to help us build our MVP and get the first product to market. And then our second big yes was actually, so my co-founder decided to go to college. which was a real challenge for me because I had actually dropped out of high school to build this business and moved to the Bay Area. I was living in the Tenderloin, trying to bootstrap it to then raise capital. And my co-founder decides to go to UPenn. And at UPenn, I'm like, well, if he doesn't drop out of UPenn, then I don't know how I'm going to grow this business. I don't know how we're going to make this thing work. And he's like, well, in order for us to do it, we need to raise some capital. And we had called all these investors and cold emailed a ton of people, and no one wanted to give us money. They're like, what business do you kids have building wealth management software? And the first investors that actually said yes were these guys, Nat Turner and Zach Weinberg, who started a company called Flatiron Health and sold it for a bunch of money to Roche. And they actually went to Penn and they're like, look, we had a similar story to you guys. They actually did complete Penn, but that 100K an investment, which, looking back, it's a small investment, but like that was the reason why we were able to keep going. And
was that a big
really
unlock to
deal.
further money? I think people forget the multiplier effect of a yes from an important group of people or person like Nat and Zach. Actually, when people say, oh, Nat and Zach are in it, it's like, oh, well, fuck it, I'll do it.
Yeah, it was super important. I think having them introduce us to people, like I didn't know the power of a warm introduction until after that. It helped us get, Founders Fund, who ended up leading that seed round, and Keith being one of his first investments at Founders Fund, partially through a warm introduction. I don't think Keith would have responded to a cold message. Maybe he would have, but that was really helpful having them on board. And I think that like aha click of like someone in Silicon Valley actually believes in this was a really helpful motivator for us.
It's funny, Keith always says, actually, there's no point in going to a load of crappy investors first because they'll ask very different questions to what like a great investor would ask. Have you found that the great investors ask different questions?
It's interesting because all the investors that ended up investing in Vise were all the great investors. Like I don't think we have any crappy investors on our cap table, and all the crappy investors for some reason passed. So maybe they saw something that the crappy investors didn't see, but for the most part, they asked better questions. They understood things faster, but I think they were able to pattern match more effectively from successes they had seen and successes they had been a part of to what we were doing in a way where, a crappy investor might not have been able to as effectively pattern match.
How did the Sequoia deal come about?
This was actually kind of funny. So we'd already gotten Founders Fund, and we're like, well, we're just going to build this business. We don't need to raise more money. Like this is not really that important to us. We don't need more VCs. We stopped talking to VCs. We're just like, we're going to build this business. But I had seen the show Silicon Valley as a kid, and I was like, I want to do Startup Battlefield. And like Founders Fund was like, this is like a waste of time. What are you guys doing? Like focus on your business. And I'm like, no, I really want to do the Startup Battlefield thing. I think it'll be fun. So I apply for Startup Battlefield. I get into Startup Battlefield and to do the pitch at TechCrunch Disrupt. And the night before the pitch, they're having a happy hour at Sequoia Capital's office. And I'm like, I don't really know if I'm going to go or not. But my co-founder and I were paying ourselves like $20,000 a year. And we were looking for free food anywhere we could find it. And there was free food at this happy hour. And it was like a 10-minute walk from our house. So we're like, okay, we'll go to this happy hour. We'll eat some free food. We don't really need to talk to Sequoia because we have Founders Fund. And we're just going to keep building our business. So we're sitting at the pretzel station at the Sequoia office. Everyone's like rushing up to Ruloff and Mike Moritz and all these famous partners there, and we're just sitting at the pretzel station shopping on pretzels, and this like guy who like looks really young walks up to us and he's like, what are you two schmucks doing? Like, how old are you guys? Like, who are you? And we start talking about Vise and what we're building, and he's like, look, like, it's fascinating because I was at this retreat with the Collison brothers, a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about like a truth that the mass doesn't necessarily believe to be true, but they believe to be true. And it was that financial advisors will continue to exist and that the relationship is really important. So like this actually makes a lot of sense. Like I get the story you guys are going after. So then we pitch at Disrupt, and he's like, you guys should come in and like meet the partnership and, talk about what you're doing. And they had actually made an investment in a company called Future Advisor, which was one of the early robo-advisors at the time, which got acquired for a couple $100 million by BlackRock. And the founder of Future Advisor was an investor of ours. And he called the Sequoia partnership separately and was like, hey, if I were to have kept building Future Advisor, Vise is taking the direction that we could have never gotten to. And having that kind of piece of credibility was really helpful going into the investment process. So So they decided to kind of preempt us on a seed extension round, and we're like, oh, I guess we'll take it. Why not? It doesn't hurt.
They then
And
doubled down also. I
they
remember
tripled down,
tripled down.
which I don't know if it happened before in Sequoia. Maybe it had. I think in Stripe and a few other instances.
Why did you say yes to that? I know it sounds stupid. Obviously, Sequoia an incredible firm, but like it just means they own a lot of one's business. What was the thinking around the tripling down? And
So I think as we started to build, and they tripled down in a short period of time. So the seed extension was done in October of 2019. Our A was done in March, and our B was done in May. And it was
what year was this?
This is 2020. So venture deals are not getting done right now. The world shuts down. We were the last investment at Sequoia before everything shut down for the pandemic, like day before the global shutdown happened. And I think that for us, I think for both Sequoia and Runik, we saw that this thesis was starting to pan out. We were getting early customer feedback. It was coming in extremely positive. We were getting a lot of positive reception. It just started to seem like all of these dynamics that we thought were going to be true started to play out and start to be true, which gave them more conviction. And then for us, we also realized, okay, if we're actually going to build this and scale this, we need a lot of capital. At least at the time, we thought we needed a lot of capital. And
do you regret raising as much money as quickly?
Yes, 100%.
Why?
And I also regret raising it all from the same firm to some of the points. I love Sequoia. I think they're great, but you want multiple voices in the boardroom. And I think the challenge is when you have one investor that owns 30% of the company and has piled in close to $50 million, then you're going to have that investor's perspective as the predominant perspective versus having some healthy debate, which I think is really important. And I think too, the challenges. So we raised something like $130 million in an 18-month period. I think we went from a seed stage company to unicorn. It was probably like one of the fastest examples at the time in history of that having happened. And that was a bad thing. And the reason why that was a bad thing is because, one, when you have a lot of capital, you lose discipline, right? When decisions no longer have, like you don't have this existential threat of dying in 6 months, like you lose a little bit more discipline. I think we grew
Where
up.
did you lose discipline most?
I mean, specifically around spending. Like we hired a lot of people. I remember like, and again, this is to Delian's credit, but I called Delian one day. We had lost like AWS. We'd overpaid AWS by $4,000. And I'm like, Delian, do you know anyone at AWS who can get us a refund for this $4,000? And he's like, dude, we gave you a seed round, so you don't have to like worry about these things. Just lose the $4,000 and like focus on growing really fast. And we're like, okay, like I guess money doesn't really matter. We're going to just focus on growing really fast. And I think that was, I think we learned the wrong lesson in that. And I think money does really matter, and being financially disciplined really, really matters. And I think even more importantly than that, when you lose that discipline and you hire all of these people, like we had gone from like 6 people to like 100 people overnight, basically. And 100 people don't actually make your business move faster. It actually slows you down. You have to deal with HR problems. You have to deal with all kinds of different perspectives on how to build. You have to deal with, a whole myriad of different things with more people versus having a strong density of really, really smart people that are all problem solving and helping you get to that next incremental milestone, as opposed to dramatically scaling your organization for the sake of scaling your organization.
Do you blame the investors? Like, I'm an investor today, and like to me, that's irresponsible foie gras of a company, I would call it.
Yeah, you're foie gras a company. I'm going to steal that term.
Yeah, like you are shoving cash down a company. I mean, 3 rounds in 6 months is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to a certain extent you can blame the investors, but at the end of the day, like I'm the one as the founder who made the decision, so I have to take ownership and accountability for it. I think I learned a lot in the process.
Was the valuation a problem?
No.
It wasn't.
The valuation, I think the expectations of the valuation was a problem. I think that
what was tied to the expectations of the valuation?
Just growth that was unrealistic. Like companies, I think VCs have built this ethos that if it doesn't get big fast, it's never going to get big. And the problem with that was, and we were getting big pretty fast, but like to grow into a $1 billion valuation in 18 months from having our founders funded our round at like 4 million, right? It's just like not possible. Like it is unrealistic. I think especially in a market like ours where it is just a slow to change market, but $1 billion businesses aren't built overnight. Right. And the bigger problem is that if a $1 billion business is built overnight, it means someone else can go build that same $1 billion business overnight. And you don't actually have a moat. So I actually think that the expectations it created for us were a bad thing. I think the type of people you recruit when they see that you're a $1 billion business aren't focused on, we have a value advice called burn the boats. They're not focused on burning the boats. They're focused on a stable career and growing within an organization and like assessing you alongside Google when, you're really like the seed series A stage company. You're not Google. And there's going to be a lot of ups and downs and things that need to be figured out that, a true $1 billion company wouldn't have to figure out.
Did it impact your psychology and did you get too big for your boots?
100%. Like when I was like the youngest person in history to have $1 billion business, like at 20 years old. I think I just turned 20 when our company was valued at $1 billion. Like we had like all of these, every day it would be a different billionaire or celebrity or someone hitting me up saying like, I want to invest in your company. Like it was just a change, like it was a change in power dynamic. It was definitely, it's not healthy. It's like a child star phenomenon. It's like not healthy for anyone to go through that.
How did you respond to that?
So I stayed relatively grounded in the sense like I don't drink, I don't do drugs. Like I was able to stay, like I had a set of core principles that I, fairly well adhered to and stuck to, throughout my entire life that I think was important, was maintained. I think the challenge was I really deeply valued money, and being very frugal and, you can't really take the Indian out of me, not to be too politically incorrect, but I think that was a little lost and I had to relearn that. But it was definitely an experience. It was definitely a wild experience.
What brought you back down to earth?
Seeing all the other founders. This wasn't like a unique to me thing. I hung out with a bunch of other founders that were also, young-ish that, built decacorns or, billion-dollar businesses, so to speak, overnight. And I think I saw the way they acted and, the way they behaved. And I was just like, okay, like this just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. Like there's something off. Like if something doesn't necessarily feel quite right, then like you kind of re-underwrite your thinking, you re-underwrite your decision making. Like it didn't make sense in 2021 for there to be a new unicorn every couple of days, reading in TechCrunch. Everything felt off. And I think because it felt off, I was like, okay, I think one, this is going to come down and there's going to be a deep major correction. And I think two, I don't like this feeling of feeling off. Like maybe I have to change my actions, the way I'm thinking, the way we're spending our time as a company, to re-account for it. And I ended up being right because before the market really took a turn, we were one of the first companies to do a major reset. And it was more painful because other companies weren't doing it, but it ended up positioning ourselves so significantly better given that we had done it.
What was involved in the major reset?
It was first re-underwriting our culture. And I think building a company in the pandemic adds a complete new level of challenges because you are building a company in an all remote environment. And to be frank, I don't think startups should be run remotely. You can't build culture when, people are, all on Zoom all day. Like you build culture at those water cooler moments and in the team. And it felt like our entire culture was off, was one. I think the second was we just recruited a lot of people that were mercenaries. They weren't missionaries.
Well, let's talk about that because I did speak to some of you. I mean, it depends how harsh you want me to be. I spoke to some of your investors and this is the one area where Samir fucked up is hiring.
Oh, big time.
Talk to me about that.
But
what did you get wrong
it.
And what did you do to correct it?
One, every founder early on like, especially as you raise all this money and you start to scale, it's like, I need to scale. Okay, like who do I need to involve when I scale? And I think all the investors are like, okay, well, you guys are young, you guys need senior executives. And senior executives will give you the leverage to be able to grow your team, to be able to manage more effectively. And those senior executives have usually run a big team before and they've come from a big company. And we recruited a lot of senior executives that they didn't understand the financial advisor.
Who told you to get senior execs?
Other venture capitalists and founders.
Okay.
So people in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. It felt like the thing to do. So that you bring on an executive recruiter. The executive recruiter puts 20 candidates in front of you. They say, hey, all of these 20 candidates have 25 offers. They've got more offers than they know what to do with. You need to sell. You can't even be thinking about interviewing. You need to be selling. And then if you get this person, you'll be super lucky and great. And we did this like 5, 6, 7 times over with an executive team that fully turned over in like 12 months. And it was all people from big tech, all people that ran big orgs at companies like Dropbox, at companies like TripActions, at companies that were, they were at Twitter, Meta, places like that. And they run 100, 200, 300 person orgs. And we didn't even interview them. Like we were just in sell mode the whole time. We got our investors in sell mode. We were just trying to convince them to join. It was such a hot market that we get this whole group of people.
Did it feel wrong in the moment?
Yes, but it felt like the thing to do. Everyone was telling us that was the thing to do. And our mindset at the time was all of these people are so much smarter than we are. They have so much experience. We are going to do what they say to do because it feels like that's the right thing to do.
How quickly did it become apparent that it was not the right thing to do?
Pretty quick. Like I would just come to work every day miserable.
Why?
Because it felt like, one, we weren't working on the right things. We were talking so much about how to make people feel heard, how to make people feel valued, how to be inclusive, and how to create a super, just like things that just quite frankly don't matter. What matters are, can we build the best possible product such that our customers, will buy it and keep buying it and refer all of their friends to buy it. And we weren't talking about, when we went into our leadership meetings, we weren't talking about that. We were talking about making infrastructure decisions that will matter in 2026 and rewriting our code to better position ourselves 4 or 5 years down the line. We were talking about making, different executives or different managers or sub-managers in the company feel better and feel more included. We were talking about, DEI. We weren't talking about our customers and their problems and how to build our product to better suit our customers and their problems.
You know what I'm saying? We need to get fucking customers. We need to get some revenue. Like, what the fuck is this stupid infrastructure discussion that we're having, whether it's, the culture of a firm that's got few customers or it's infrastructure problems for 2026? Like, is no one going, hang on a minute, what the fuck is going on?
No, because when you raise so much capital so quickly and you have all of these great investors on your cap table and everyone says this company's the shit, you just think that it works. And you've been at companies where you didn't actually none of these people had to go out and find product market fit. They came into companies where there was already product market fit and they just had to operate their little part of that company or big part of that company where they were kind of keeping it status quo. Most of these companies that they came from were just they haven't grown very much. They're just there and they're operating and they're running their part, but none of them had to find product market fit. So they just assume, okay, when I come, this company's already got to figure it out. I'm just going to do the same thing I did at X company. I'm going to run my playbook that I did at X company and I'm going to bring it over to Vise. And you've got all these people with playbooks versus first principles thinkers that are trying to actually understand the problem and problem solve with you to actually drive product market fit. So it felt like that was the case, and we got so much pressure on us at the time that it was we have to keep these people happy. They're going to solve our problems. That's why you bring executives in. And it was pretty apparent that that wasn't the case.
When did that start turning? When was it apparent? 3 months in, 6 months in?
Yeah, it was probably 3 to 6 months in. I think we were too optimistic at the time. So 3 months in, we're like, this is a problem. 6 months in, we're like, okay, this is broken. And like, I think we were optimistic
Are
of,
you talking to the board about it at this point, going, this is not working?
I think the board was kind of like, you got to figure out how to make these people happy and like you. At the time, that changed. I think the board, as the market started to change, I think the board started to realize, okay, we actually need to make some changes as a business.
Did you feel that you could talk to the board?
Yeah, like I was friends with all of our board members, so I felt like we could talk to all of them. I think the challenge is, if you have a board member full of VCs, VCs are gonna just, they're gonna act like VCs, right?
What does that mean?
They're thinking about their incentives. They're thinking
What do
about
you think our incentives are?
their incentives. I think, look, I have empathy for VCs in some respect because they're such a short feedback cycle, meaning like you don't know if such a long feedback cycle. You don't know if your investment is going to work for a decade or longer sometimes. So you're trying to find signals that will show to your partners, your LPs, that this investment is doing well. So when so oftentimes it's like what other people say about a particular company. Like, oh, Harry says Vise is great. My investment's doing well. If I'm, pick your VC,
Sure.
Right? And, oh, like Harry's, blah, blah, blah executive is saying the founders are really causing problems and they're not listening to me, right? Then the focus on the board meeting is how do you make that executive feel heard? You're not talking about, if you had some kind of industry expert or someone who, prominent customer or someone who doesn't have the incentives of a VC that is on your board, that is voicing, the customer, that is voicing the problem you're out to solve, that is voicing a set of things other than, how the VCs perceive the world.
Do you think they were involved enough in your business to advise you?
Yeah, but just on the wrong things. They spent a lot of time. Sean rolled up his sleeves, worked super hard. That guy is a total, like, just grinds. I think he was like a shadow third co-founder. But like, we were just working on all the wrong things. He'd spend all of his time executive recruiting. He would join all the search calls. He would spend time, making people feel heard. He would spend time defending us to these various executives or team members and saying, no, they're great guys. You gotta trust them.
Were they rising up against you?
The executives? 100%. Yeah.
For what reason?
I think anytime someone doesn't find success in a role, I think they need, like, a lot of people can't take the accountability that it was their fault. They need to point the fingers at someone. Like, oh, it's the founder's fault. It's this. So I think, like, because something wasn't working in one particular part of the org or another, they were pointing at us to have solved that problem, and then that would then elevate up to the board. But I think the reason why we brought them in, which again was the wrong reason, was to solve some of those key problems. When in reality, we should have just been solving it on our own.
You take responsibility for that, though, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like, it's my fault for hiring all of these people. Like, the key is, like, I think founders don't realize this because for a long time, you don't get enough advice, and then you start getting capital and you have stakeholders and you get too much advice. And the problem is a lot of this advice is either bad advice, 99% of the advice is bad advice, and then the rest of the advice is contradictory to each other. So you don't necessarily know, and like someone who's built some super successful company or is at some world-renowned venture fund, you're going to just assume their advice is good advice, right? If you're a first-time founder. And I think that for us, like, we just assumed all this advice was good advice. And until we stopped listening to everyone's advice and like just started figuring it out for ourselves, the business just wasn't working. And then once we figured it out for ourselves, everything turned around. It was great.
I think with advice, it's all rooted in context. It could be technology cycles. It could be different teams. It could be different go-to-market motion. You name it. Everything is so rooted in context. And I always think like founders need to be filtration mechanisms for like just different pieces of advice. And you need to pass what's good and what's not.
I agree.
What are some big lessons when you made the decision to let people go and how you did it? And what are some big lessons from that?
If you feel like you should let someone go, you should just do it and do it as fast as possible. Like, I've never once, actually one exception, but most of the 99.9% of the time, never regretted letting someone go. It was almost always the right decision. And I think too many people, too many founders, too many managers drag their feet. And it's oftentimes the incentive of the manager. So when you're the founder and you've got a manager and that manager is managing other people and someone on their team isn't performing, they're not living up to their expectations, the manager is oftentimes not going to say, hey, let me fire them. Rather, it's let me take some time, let me really nurture them, let me figure it out, let me put them on a PIP, something like that. And like, you just don't have time as a startup. You need to keep your bar super high. You're not a machine, you're a basketball team, right? You're not, you can only have 5 players on the court. And all of those five players have to be really good. They have to work together. They have to uphold the bar for each of the other players. And I think a lot of people think about their companies as factories. And if a part is broken for a little bit, they can fix the part or, at some point bring in a new part. But that's not how you should think about the startup. And I think thinking that way is really, really dangerous. And oftentimes a lot of managers, especially ones that come from bigger tech companies where there are these like kind of legacy HR policies, they're just not as ruthless with headcount and personnel decisions as they should be. And yes, I'm a bit ruthless. Does it come off, a little bit cold sometimes? Yes, but like you have to kind of be like that because we are fighting for, survival and fighting to succeed every single day. And you just can't let anything get in the way of that.
Are there any other big lessons in terms of the way that you build that team and what went wrong?
See, I want people to when they come to Vise, I want them to feel like they're doing their life's work. And when I think about the people that are the best performers, and it's not like the most senior people, it's like all kinds of different types of backgrounds, right? We had this kid who was like a trader for a year at Guggenheim, who's now running, now he's 26 and he's running our entire, enterprise product strategy, right? We had another guy who was just an investment strategy guy at his previous role, and he's now our chief investment officer, right? People have different irrational motivators, right? Some kind of chip on their shoulder, some drive to win, some kind of hidden fire, right? The same fire I had to prove myself in building this business. And you need to unlock that in prospective candidates, right? I don't want someone who was like, I was a VP of engineering and now I want to be a CTO. And then after that, I want to be a COO. Like, I want someone who understands our customer problem, who understands our mission, has a deep sense of passion, of desire, as something to prove as to why they're going to work their tail off for us, why they're going to push harder here than they would at any big company. And, there's signals you could find in the interview process, but sometimes, quite frankly, you have to learn as they're at their company.
Did you pay people too much too soon?
Did we pay people too much too soon?
Yeah.
Yes. But we also just looked for, we weren't looking for the right things in the interview process. We were looking for, biggest company, biggest role, like most kind of status, like what will people like follow this person because of how successful they've been. And all of these people have a reputation. And the problem with people who have a reputation is that they're all trying to constantly defend their reputation. And if something is going to make them look bad, if there's going to be some kind of something that will potentially damage their reputation, they're going to flee, right? They're going to get off the boat before you burn it. And that's dangerous for startups.
Did you worry about being a tarnished startup?
We did for a little while, which is why, so in 2021, when we knew we had this bad executive team, when we knew our culture was wrong, when we knew we probably should have everyone just in the office and this remote work thing isn't working out, when we knew we had too many people, we were like, well, if we make a set of hard decisions, then like everyone's going to think we're like a broken, failing, company, and, we're not going to be able to raise more money, and we're not going to be able to recruit great people, and customers aren't going to like us. And we were just scared. And it's part of the reason why we didn't make the decision sooner. And at a certain point, I just like, this is too much. I'm just going to do it. Like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
How much were you burning a year at your peak?
We were probably burning $3 million a month.
$3 million a month. How much did you raise in total?
128, I think.
Okay. So you still have a shed load of cash then?
Oh, now we have a ton of cash.
Yeah.
We never have to raise again. But like if we had kept burning and kept scaling at the rate we were, then we would be out of money. Like a lot of other growth stage companies that in 2021 that didn't make hard decisions. We just made the hard decisions basically at the end of 2021, early 2022, before the markets had really reset. And it's funny, I wrote this a year later. I wrote this blog post called Refounding Vise. And the reason why I wrote that blog post, everyone thought we made the changes in early 2023 and like that was like a pivot moment, but it was actually a reflective blog post of the decisions, the changes we made in early 2022 to convince all of my founder friends who are running companies who hadn't made hard decisions that you can make a set of hard decisions and you're going to be just fine. Everything about Vise after we made those hard decisions was better. It was hard for a month, but then a month later, the team came together. Our burn was way down.
Okay, but it's with the caveat, it's better if you have a shed load of cash. If you don't have a shed load of cash, you got to go back into fundraising markets with a slightly hit brand at the time and a non-hot fundraising story.
Right, but you shouldn't get to that point. Like if you should have made the right decision years prior, right? A lot of founders are gambling, right? They're like, okay, I believe I can avoid making a tough decision because my business is just going to magically work, a year from now, and this go-to-market's finally going to work, and I'm not going to have to cut anyone. And then it doesn't happen, and they have 6 months of cash left, and they have to make a set of hard decisions, and they're forced to make those decisions.
Did your investors ever put pressure on you to return the money?
Not necessarily return money, but there was definitely pressure in the sense that, so in 2021, all of our competitors got acquired. And they got acquired for a lot of money. And there was definitely like, you guys could exit this business and you guys could both make a lot of money, number one. And number two, the investors that invested at that, those high prices, it's going to take them like some time for us to regrow into that valuation. If we were to sell the company, they would get their money back, right? And again, it creates an incentive mismatch.
But would they? Like with the lit prefs, you've got to sell for 125 million.
Yeah, we would have sold for more than that.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Were you tempted to sell for that?
No, and the reason why, tempted, did I think about it? Yeah, of course. But the reason why I didn't is because my broad thesis on the space is that platform is going to be the biggest thing when it comes to asset management. Like all asset managers will have to become platform companies, right? Investment advice will no longer be delivered through people and investment products. It will be delivered through platform in a personalized way at scale for every single investor. And the DNA of these incumbent asset managers is not to build technology. It's not to build great product. It's not to build great software. And I know that because I spent times with the senior leadership teams at every single large asset management company, spent time with the product team, spent time with the engineering team, and I knew they didn't have the capability to build what we built. And the rate at which we were building what we were building and the rate at which it was improving was going to make it inevitably more valuable, year after year after year. And I just looked at it from the standpoint of like, I was at the time 21 years old. If I just stick at this for another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever period of time, I'm going to inevitably create a lot of value. And it's not about creating the short-term value. It's about sticking at something for the long term and compounding value year after year after year. And I had that principle. And the only reason why I had that principle is because we were working on it, 5, 6, 7 years prior. And I knew that year after year after year, it got better and better and better. And I would regret for the rest of my life, not building this into what I believe it could be.
Did you mind investors selling secondary throughout?
We had transfer restrictions. So investors, unless they had special permission from the company, they couldn't necessarily, they couldn't sell secondary. But in the cases where we did have either employees or investors sell secondaries, if it was for the right reason, I get it. But like, if it's like, oh, we don't believe in these guys anymore, then I just kind of thought it was like, okay, fuck you. I'm going to work extra hard to make this company 10 times more valuable. I don't want anyone on the cap table who doesn't want to be on the cap table.
Okay. So when you think about advising founders today, what would you advise them on transfer restrictions and how they engage with investors who want to sell?
Well, you don't want investors, like if an investor wants to sell, you should let them sell, but you need to know who's buying the stock. Because the worst case scenario is you let the investor sell to some rando, and that rando ends up being a pain on your cap table. And like there's someone you don't want on the cap table. Like I wouldn't necessarily want an investor selling to an investor I didn't know and wasn't comfortable having on the cap table. So I think that's why you have the transfer restrictions in place.
When you think about the impact of investors, I think people often say an investor doesn't make a company, whatever. Like the brands of Founders Fund and Sequoia make a big difference. To what extent do they negatively versus positively impact the trajectory of a company?
So it's a double-edged sword. And the reason why it's a double-edged sword is because on one hand, you've got all of this great credibility by association. You have all of this social capital. And that social capital allows you to hire people. It allows you to get great customers. It allows you to get in the press. It allows you to raise money from other investors. Everyone pattern matches to what is Sequoia, what is Founders Fund, what are these prominent investors doing. The reason why it's a double-edged sword is a lot of people see it as their, especially prospective employees, see it as their get rich quick. Like this company is a rocket ship. They raised all this money from Sequoia. I'm going to go join and it's going to work and it's going to be awesome, right? And it's an attractor for talent. And oftentimes this is the wrong talent for your business. And you need to be extra mindful of, is this person joining my company because of my company and the mission and, some irrational motivator as to why they're going to be really successful here? Or are they joining my company because they see it as a quick path to an exit because Sequoia backed it? And you don't want those people that are just joining because of Sequoia.
Did you sell secondary?
Of course, a small amount. I think that it's it was I think for a founder to get a little bit of liquidity is really, really important in terms of long-term decision making. Because from an incentives perspective, if you're a founder and you've got 100% of your net worth in this company and you're going through hard times and you're not sure if you can afford rent, or you're not sure if you can make it through some tough time, thus you want to sell, or you want to make kind of a personally wrongly incentivized decision, that can be dangerous. It can oftentimes force you to not want to take risk because you're holding on to so much risk in the company. But I think there's a zone of reasonableness. And I think selling $1 million of secondary, I think is reasonable for a founder to have a financial cushion.
Is that what you sold?
Around there.
Do you regret not selling more?
It's crazy because I had offers to buy a lot more secondary.
Yeah.
It just didn't make sense to me. One, we thought it was a bad look to our investors. Founders cash out all of this money in secondary. I think it would have been a smart personal financial decision. And it's clear that a lot of other founders took, sometimes $100 million of secondary. So maybe from a personal financial decision, it would have been the risk-adjusted correct decision to make to have sold more secondary.
Do you think you would be a better leader today if you had taken more cash off the table then?
No. Huh. I think the reason why is I met Jensen from NVIDIA, and he's like, look, in order to build true resilience and to continue compounding, you kind of need to be and you need to be comfortable being miserable. And I think if you have $10 million in the bank, it's just hard to be miserable. And I think there were points in time where I was miserable, and that was a deeply motivating factor. And I think that if I was just too comfortable, if I had all this money, if I had, all the things that come with all of that money, maybe I just would have been too comfortable and I would have just not been willing to make the set of hard decisions I did.
That's interesting. Do you think money makes you happy then?
No. And it's funny.
But you said it's hard to be miserable with $10 million.
I think happiness and comfort are two different things. Comfort can breed complacency, right? You're not and again, I think there's a zone of reasonableness, right? I think having no money in the bank, being borderline broke, which is what was our financial situation before we took a little bit off the table, is not good for you because you're not willing. I think having a little bit of money is healthy, right? It is healthy. It's good. You can sleep at night. I think having too much money is dangerous. At least too much money early on is dangerous. So I think it's about the general reasonableness. But I had enough money to the point where I had the chip on my shoulder. I needed to prove that it could work. I needed to prove that I could build a big thing. But I didn't have so much money that I was okay, if this doesn't work, I'm comfortable. I'll buy a mansion and I'll screw off.
Do you worry about scaling into the valuation?
No. Because why does it matter, right? It would matter if I had a massive preference stack above me. But because we have so much money in the bank and we don't burn very much, I don't necessarily have to. What matters more than your valuation is your preference stack, right? If you've got a billion-dollar preference stack, not a billion-dollar valuation, and you go sell the company for $500 million, then you're still underwater, right? If you don't have all that in cash.
Sure.
But if you have, a $120 million preference stack and you sell the company for $100 million, and you still have $80 million of cash, that's, was $60 million of value that waterfalls to the whole cap table.
And so not worried about scaling into it?
No. What matters more is the dilution you take in that every time you spend $1, you functionally dilute yourself.
Do you see investor engagement differ when you're not a hot company?
I wouldn't even say it's like investor engagement. I would say it's like, generally speaking, like I've learned a lot about people. I further affirmed my belief of like, it's really important to have a core group of like close friends that are like your friends regardless. So your friends from when you were like a child, onwards, that like is your true group of friends. Because like a lot of people are going to come into your life and they're going to come into your life for the wrong reasons. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of that. And when something starts to change, those people move out of your life. And you're like, well, like, what did I do something wrong? Like, was I a bad person? But it's just like, you're not the cool hot thing. They're going to move on to like, if crypto's hot, they're going to move on to the cool crypto guy. Now AI's hot, they're all going to move on to the big AI founders. And they're going to just keep moving from cycle to cycle to cycle. They're going to chase the hot thing.
Did that hurt?
I think for some people, some investors, I think pretended to be our friends. And, when incentives were flipped or we weren't as hot, I think they weren't our friends anymore. And I think that hurt because I thought those people were truly our friends. I think there were some set of people where I was like, oh yeah, it's just like, it's none of this matters. It's just noise, right? At the end of the day, we're going to compound, we're going to build a big business. Like them not liking us or them kind of losing some favor with us doesn't necessarily matter to us. I think people pretending to be your friends, pretending to deeply care about you, and then, stabbing you in the back in some way, shape, or form, or talking about that, I think really hurts.
Do you think people stabbed you in the back?
I think people definitely tried to at different points in time. I think they just weren't successful.
What was the hardest element of the investor base then?
The mistake I made was underwriting people's emotions, not their incentives. And I was like, oh, this person is saying this particular thing to me. They feel this particular way. I don't want them to feel this particular way. I'm going to say this particular thing so they feel happy. And like, that's just like the wrong way to think. The right way to think is, what are my incentives? What are their incentives? How do we get to a shared, outcome to the common good, which is increase our enterprise value of the business? If it doesn't, right? If their incentives don't line with mine, right? Then like I'm cognizant of it. I can replay back why their incentives don't necessarily align with mine, but like I'm going to do the right thing for the company. I'm not going to try and change myself or my emotional state or change something about the business to make that person feel happy.
Did you go through periods of depression?
Yes, but nothing dwarfs. So like there was a point in time, I was 16 years old. I was living in San Francisco. I was living in the Tenderloin, and then I moved to this house called the Crypto Castle. I was living with 12 people. We shared one bathroom. My parents didn't really like me because I dropped out of school. My co-founder was still in high school, moving on to college. Like the business was kind of working, wasn't really working. We were bootstrapping it. I was like pretty much broke. And I'm like, there's no plan B. Like if this doesn't work, like I'm fucked. And I think that was the like lowest I'd ever been. And there's no way, like no matter all the ups and downs I went through post, raising capital and being the hot thing, there's no low that's ever going to be as low as the low that I felt at that point in time.
What did you tell yourself in that moment?
I don't know. I just believe in destiny and some like, it's like sounds kind of cuckoo, but like I just believe like this was the thing when I was like, there's just no way I would like not figure out how to be successful, not figure out like this was the only path in life for me.
Can I ask, who are you trying to prove it to?
I think I'm trying to prove it to myself at this point in time. Like I think in the beginning it was a lot of the motivator was like, my teachers at school were like, what's this kid doing? Talking about all of this business stuff. He should be focused on school. My parents were like, why don't you, the rest of the class is thinking about college applications and getting good grades and extracurricular activities, and you're just so fixated on this. There's a point in time where they had hired a therapist to talk me out of running the business and just be a normal kid. And I think for a long time that had been and this was years of my life, had been a motivating factor of I'm going to prove all of these people wrong and I'm going to be so successful. And I think I did prove those people wrong. I felt for a while, especially as we started to gain a lot of traction. And then I think it flipped. And I think it flipped, which is everyone's these guys are a foregone conclusion. They're the next Collison brothers. They're the next, next big thing. It's just going to work. Vise is going to be a $10, $20 billion business. And we're this feels weird. For our whole lives, we were trying to prove everyone wrong. And now we're in now everyone believes in us, and it's about proving them right. And there was something that felt wrong about that. There was something that felt deeply wrong about that. And then when it flipped again, then we just kind of felt we were back at home. We felt we had our motivating factor.
Do you have a relationship with your parents today?
Yeah, my parents and I are super close. I think
Do you not hold it against them that they didn't believe in you?
No, because I think they eventually believed in me.
When the signals were there?
When the signals started to pop up, yeah.
But I'm not by no means comparing. My parents have many flaws, but mine didn't give a shit about me leaving law school. I was a scholar at law school, but a perfect way to do a very kind of corporate life. And I remember calling up my mother and I was like, you know what, I'm going to leave and I'm going to do the podcast. She's like, great, good.
I think if you're a parent, I think a couple things happen. I think what the other parents and the other parents' kids say about you, and that kind of breeds some, they see the kid who got into Stanford, who won the debate, debate champion, who's does, a tennis star. They see that kid and they're why can't you be him? Why can't you be that person? And they see, they're at the parent cocktail parties and,
I mean this in the nicest way, dude. Do you not think that is bad parenting? One, you are projecting an image of what you should be on your child, which is complete bullshit. Two, it's just groupthink.
But that's all at least in the U.S. I don't know what it's like in London, but in England, but
different.
But in the U.S., there's so much of this tiger parenting, this groupthink.
But the pressure on you is.
Yeah, there's pressure on all these kids. That's why all these kids are super anxious and depressed, and they have expectations they don't know if they can live up to. It's just the United States at this point in time, and I just never. I just always assumed I was playing a different game than everyone else was. And I'm going to win at my game and they can all play their game and do fine on it. And I just always saw the bigger picture. I'm none of this fits into my world. None of this fits into my picture. And I think the reason why it didn't cause a lot of damage long-term with my relationship with my parents or my family in general is because I think I had the introspection to believe if I was them, right? If I'm a parent, I'm, in the 2010s US, and given the information I know at the time, what would I don't know anything about this, startups in Silicon Valley and kids going out and starting a company. This is kind of unprecedented. How am I going to react as a parent? So I think I just had some empathy for them looking back that at the time I didn't have, that they did the best they could.
Do you think you hold vengeance or revenge, or do you think you kind of forget it?
I remember people that gave up on me, and I remember I think it's not necessarily the people that gave me no's. It's not the people that didn't believe on me in the beginning. I think it's the people that gave up on me. I think it's the people that were this kid just doesn't get it. He's not listening to me, or I think this about him. I'm going to move on to the next thing, whether that's an investor, whether that's a executive, whether it's it's another founder, right, or a peer, right? I think I deeply remember those people that I was friends with at one point in time that I thought believed in me, that told me they were along for the journey. They told me that I could call them at any night and at any hour of any day of the year, and they're going to be there for me. And those people in the time of need were not there for me.
What piece of advice were you given that you disregarded that you should have taken?
I don't regret a lot. I think I just kind of had to learn. There was a great piece of advice Ravi gave me that I should have internalized. I think there's a difference in terms of advice that like I think there's a world of difference in terms of what you know versus what you've internalized. So I think a lot of people can parrot things of like, you should do this particular thing, and it sounds like you should have integrity, right? And like, yeah, it's like something you should have. You should have integrity, but like oftentimes people know that, but they don't have integrity, right? So I think there's a difference in terms of what people know and what they do, and I think one piece of advice that I was given is you can't necessarily learn other people's lessons for them. I would spend so much time on trying to, get someone or, whether it's a team member, whether it's someone to do something, to learn something. And they wouldn't learn it. Then they would go and they would make that set of mistakes on their own, and they would learn their lesson. And I think a lot of that applied to me as well, which is like, I can't just listen to successful founders and all of their advice, just blindly adopt it. Like I have to kind of learn for myself to some extent. And I think so much of my ethos early on was, I'm going to go to the smartest people on earth, the most powerful, connected, successful people on earth, and I'm going to ask them what they did. And I'm going to just do that because like it clearly worked for them. It's going to work for me. And like, it just didn't work for me. Their businesses were different than my business. The market was different at that time than it was for me. And like, I didn't learn the lessons for myself, when in reality, over time, the only way to learn was if I learned it myself.
I do want to move to a quick fire. So I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay? So who do you not have on your board who you would love to have on your board?
I would have loved to have someone with deep domain expertise early on when we raised our Series A round in our space, who had built a company, similar in shape to ours. And I think having a perspective like that in the room would have been really valuable.
What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you started Vise, above everything else?
Don't overly rely on others' advice. Like, figure it out for yourself and don't quit until the job is done.
What are you most insecure about today?
I don't know, that it doesn't work. Like, I feel like I've put all of my eggs in this basket, and like, I think there's some...
You feel a bit trapped?
Yeah. I think trapped is, maybe not trapped, because I love what I do, but like, I don't necessarily... I think there's some worry, there's some concern that it doesn't work.
If it doesn't work, it will be okay.
Well, I do. I know it. I think I rationally know it. But I think, when you work on something for, it's been like 7-8 years now, like since you were 15, 16, like it becomes your baby, it becomes your identity, it becomes a part of you. And I think that one kind of lesson I'll give to founders is separate yourself and your identity, your personal identity, from that of your company. And I think that's important to do, and I think it's hard to do.
Have you done it? I have not done it.
I haven't, but I would really like to. Like, I am Vise, Vise is me. Like, I'm in it. And I think maybe that's a little unhealthy.
It's unhealthy, but I think it's a necessity.
Yeah.
It's like obsession is a necessity, and it's very difficult to be obsessed and detached at the same time.
Yeah.
So I completely get you. What leadership skill do you not have that you would most like to get?
And it's something I started to learn as we had a bigger team, and I had to manage people and managers, but like this feeling of like deep empathy and the ability to elevate to elevate everyone around me, more than just on the vision of the business. Again, it comes with time, it comes with experience, but I think so much of my time, I'm just so focused on, the business, on figuring out the solving the problems of the business, and I'm not thinking about elevating everyone around me. And I think that, I think there's some value in doing that. Like, I think it's important not to overcorrect. I think it's important not to get too close to Elon. I think there is some balance where you're really helping support and boost those around you in a meaningful way.
Do you think you always did investor communications well?
Investor communications, yes.
Like letting investors know about the status of the business, the progress of the business.
I think it was too optimistic early on, and I think now I see a deep sense of reality. And part of why I was very optimistic is just because I didn't know any other way to be. Like I was just very I was naive, and as a result of being naive, I was very optimistic. And I also knew that in every interaction, that investor was re-underwriting me.
Yeah.
I think now I realized none of it matters. The only thing that matters is building a great business and making sure that your customers love your product and you have a long-term sensible strategy and go to market that will support your growth aspirations into your vision. And I think that for a long time I was like, how are investors going to perceive this, and how are they going to perceive that, and like how do I make them feel, and like I don't care. Like I'm going to tell them what's going on in the business. If it's going well, I'll tell them it's going well. If it's not going well, I'll tell them what we're working on making it, to improve it. And we're all on the journey together for the long haul. We all know this is going to be a business that is going to compound year after year after year. It's not going to be a business that just works one day and becomes $1 trillion business and overnight. It's one that's going to take time.
Final one for you. It's 2034. Okay, so you'll be 33.
Yeah.
Yeah, fucking hell. God, you were born in 2000s, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
Jesus, I played FIFA with your year birth. I mean, not too far off, to be honest. But yeah. Where are you then? Like, where do you want Vise to be then? Where do you want to be then?
I don't know the time horizon, but my vision is to build the asset manager of the future. Build a platform that enables all investors, regardless of their age, their net worth, to be able to deliver deeply personalized portfolios across all asset classes, publics and privates, all in one beautiful, elegant software experience. And I think that the path to getting there requires a shift in the industry to move away from people, human portfolio managers and investment products like the mutual fund, like the ETF, like the separately managed account, into platform-driven investing. And I think that that's going to take some time and some shaping as an industry. And I think we're going to help that shaping happen. But it's going to take time. And I think that in 10 years, hopefully we'll be well on our way to making this new market a reality.
Samir, listen, dude, I've loved doing this. I've known you for a while. It's so special to do it in person. It makes such a difference having that chemistry. And so thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great reflecting.